Welcome to the Gender in Focus podcast. I'm Elle, and each week I get to ask Kai Scott, the president of TransFocus Consulting, all the questions you have ever wanted to ask about trans and non-binary people in the workplace and in the wider world.
People can get stuck thinking that all gender multi-stall washrooms are somehow more unsafe or not as safe as women's and men's spaces. Part of the reason for that misunderstanding is that within all gender multi-stall, they are designed totally differently than men's and women's spaces. Like they're like a totally, you can't just kind of slap on a sign and be like, okay, it's all gender.
It's often like, why do we need to do this when it's only helping 1% of the population? And it's actually, when you kind of pull together all the people who might benefit from these spaces, they are actually the majority. There's most of us can benefit from all gender washrooms in ways that we maybe wouldn't expect.
All gender washrooms get talked about a lot, but rarely with nuance. In this episode of Gender in Focus, we're breaking down the difference between single-user and multi-stall all-gender washrooms, who actually uses them, hint, it's not just trans and non-binary folks, and why privacy, safety, disability access, and family needs all show up in these spaces. We'll also unpack what inclusive signage really means and what it definitely doesn't. Plus, share a standout example of a multi-stall, all-gender washroom at Clayton Community Centre in Surrey, BC. Elle, you see these questions and the panic play out on social media. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking this with you here today and to actually see what people are really reacting to when they think of all-gender washrooms. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I do see a lot of this play out on social media. And it's always super fascinating because often it's either met with like outright anger or just complete confusion. And there seems to be, that's the binary. That's either side of that's the spectrum we're on. And so, yeah, I guess how I wanted to start this, if it's okay with you, is first of all, just talking about what kinds of washrooms we are specifically talking about in this episode, because like I don't want there to be any confusion around like what spaces that like each space has different needs, whether it's a sort of multi-stall or whether it's single unit. And so before I get into who's using what, can we just outline what it is specifically we're talking about here?
Absolutely.
If that's okay.
Yeah, it's so important to clarify because there's a few different configurations of washrooms and also change rooms. And so it's important to be clear so that people understand what's at play. For today's episode, we are focused on multi-stall all-gender washrooms. But the reason why I wanted to distinguish is that there are also single unit washrooms. So those are the self-contained washrooms, have their own door, walls around it, and a toilet and a sink, and it's yours, private, and is a really popular option. It used to be called, it's the washroom that people with disabilities use. It has expanded a bit to offer options for other folks, especially for folks who don't want to access either the men's nor the women's. And so it has become kind of an all gender space, but it is single unit. Everybody's excited. Well, not everybody, but many people are excited by this configuration. But the other type of all gender washroom is a multi-stall one. And that's where people tend to pump the brakes, or some people do at least. And that's why we thought it'd be good to go into it a little bit more, recognizing that there's different things at play within those spaces where genders come together in a way that maybe not everybody is used to, knowing that we've had traditionally men's and women's only spaces.
Right. You just mentioned this, but when people hear all gender washrooms, they often assume that it is just for trans and non-binary people, or at least that's what it looks like on social media from the comments that I get. It's often like, why do we need to do this when it's only helping 1% of the population? And it's actually really, or at least my understanding of this is, when you kind of pull together all the people who might benefit from these spaces, they are actually the majority. There's most of us can benefit from all gender washrooms in ways that we maybe wouldn't expect. And so my first question then is, who actually uses these spaces and who benefits from it outside of trans and non-binary people? Of course,
Mhm.
trans and non-binary people too.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to recognize, like you said, it is a majority.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's overlooked because maybe we're just looking at it from a siloed perspective, right? Of course, it helps trans and non binary folks, mainly
Hmm.
because there's no gendered expectations for how somebody should look, what their shape of their body is. Everybody is allowed into that space, and that
Hmm.
clarity and spaciousness is really instrumental to access for trans folks, where there can be a disconnect between, or a difference between their gender identity and how they look. So that's number one. But you're right, it's not a trans specific washroom. There is no such thing. There's not one place where trans people go. That would be a very dangerous thing, in fact,
Hmm.
if that were the case, because there's still a lot of stigma against trans folks, and to label a washroom in such a way would basically put a target on somebody's back, right? And so
Hmm.
there is no such thing. It would not be a good idea to do so. And so that's where this, all gender, multi stall washroom is serving so many different types of people. We hear time and time again, we've done patron listening booths at recreational centers or during surveys that we've done at universities. We find time and time again that families really need spaces where, no matter the gender configurations of the family, they can go in together. There's
Hmm.
so much that parents have to navigate. I'm not a parent myself, but I have a lot of compassion. If you're going into a single gender space and you have a kid of another gender, like, then you have to figure out, okay, how old are they? How will the others react to a kid of a different gender? Are they going to involve staff? Like, this is just like a huge calculus
Hmm.
versus all gender multi-stall, no thought process. Just go
Right.
in. There's no expectations or weirdness that might happen. It's just easy. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is for people with disabilities. Typically, all gender multi stall are set up in a way where there's a handful, one or more accessible stalls.
Hmm.
Some of them have adult lifts, which is super, super important for people with disabilities to be able to participate in
Hmm.
life. Sometimes they have care attendants that are of a different gender as well.
Yeah.
And so, similar to families, it's not a lot of thought process if there's that all gender multi stall space. Last one is friends, even like going together. And so you don't have to stop your conversation. You can just continue it, maybe not in the stall, but
Right.
there's a social flow to that. So those are just a handful of folks, types of groups that benefit from it beyond just trans and non-binary folks.
What I will say, like from my perspective personally here, is that
Mhm.
I've been a caregiver to my
Mm,
brother who is disabled, and
yeah.
there have been quite a few issues where we've come across, because some of the kind of arguments we've had is, well, there are disabled toilets, there are disabled bathrooms, and
Mm,
so often those spaces are not really treated with the respect that they deserve. Often
right.
there'll be like a storage room. You might find that, like, we've been in swimming centers before. I've taken my brother swimming, and that's just been a sort of dumping ground. The disabled bathroom is like where everybody puts their like mop, and it's just like cluttered and you can't use it, and
Mm,
it's incredibly dangerous for somebody who's not very steady on his feet.
right.
um, so that's really tricky. It's also often not designed in a way that puts disabled people at the forefront, and it's not
Mhm,
super helpful. The space can be pretty dangerous if it's not designed right. And so it's and also what tends to happen is there might be like one
mm,
disabled washroom, and
yeah.
so if you have three disabled people,
Mm,
you're stuck. You're in a position where you can't use it. And I'm um you know a different gender to my brother, and
mhm,
so I can't just take him to the washroom with me, and I
yeah,
can't really go in with him either, and so it really puts us in a bit of a bind. And
yeah.
when we've been in spaces that have access to these sort of multi-stall gender washrooms, it means that my dad can help me too, or it means that,
Mm,
like,
mm,
myself and my sister and my brother can go in and help him out. So it's It's so helpful.
Mm,
I'm so passionate about this because it's been so helpful to me in so many ways, not just because I'm non-binary. And there are
yeah,
some days where I really feel discomfort around that. Not all the time and not very often, but there are
mhm,
times where I do. And then also it's helped me and my brother throughout my life.
mm.
And it really does benefit so many people.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so it illustrates the kind of day-to-day struggle that
Hmm.
families can endure because things aren't set up properly. You know,
Hmm.
whether it's from the disability lens or from, gender identity. And oftentimes, single unit washrooms are tucked away somewhere under lock and
Yeah.
key, too. That
Hmm.
just adds that, number of hoops that you have to jump through to get there. And like you really do feel like an afterthought,
Yeah.
from that perspective where it's like I gotta, stroll or legs, somewhere extra, and then also have to talk to a security guard who may be,
Hmm.
with suspicion, right? It's just like
Yeah.
it's not great. So yeah.
Also a lot of the washrooms, sorry, I'll get
Mhm.
out of this, but some of the disabled washrooms, you have like a special key to get in, and
Mm.
you get access to that. So you have these keys, but
Oh,
they it means that anybody can unlock the door if you have a key. So there have been times where I've been helping my brother
right.
out, and then somebody unlocks the door and walks in. And it's
Whoa.
like he like deserves privacy too. And
Sure.
so all gender washrooms offer that space. And it's also, some of the fear as well is if something happens or an accident happens, he hurts himself, and or he's quite a lot bigger than me,
Mhm,
so he hurts me,
mhm.
which has never happened, thankfully, but you don't know,
Yeah,
that you're locked away and nobody knows that you're in there until somebody finds you. And so
right.
we're actually all gender sort of like sort of yeah, like hang on, wait, what am I saying, multi-store washrooms
Yeah,
provide that like safety as well. There's a lot of safety involved in that, and that's the thing that a lot of people really get stuck on is
yeah.
safety and how to keep these spaces safe. So I was wondering if you would mind going into that too, from the
Mm,
perspective of course trans and non-binary people, but also sort of wider too,
yeah.
if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, that's a really important point, and one you're right where people can get stuck,
Hmm.
thinking that all gender multi-stall washrooms are somehow more unsafe, or
Hmm.
not as safe as women's and men's spaces, and part of the reason for that misunderstanding is that there are, within all gender multi stall, they are designed totally differently
Right.
than men's and women's spaces. Like they're like a totally, you can't just kind of slap on a sign and be like, okay, it's all gender,
Right.
onto a
Hmm.
men's or a women's. In fact, some clients have come to us and said, that's what we want to do. And then we say, actually, we'd advise you to renovate these spaces, to introduce more safety measures, more privacy measures to make this work, right? You can't kind of carbon copy them. And so men's and women's spaces typically have not that great of privacy. I don't know
Right.
your experiences, but I don't like
Yes.
those gaps between the door and the frame. Like, not very few people do. from
No.
what from our
Ew.
research, our extensive
Agreed.
research, surprise, shocker. Um, and there's gaps at the bottom, and then maybe maybe the lighting's not so great. There's all kinds, and then it's kind of also the door to the entrance is shut, and so again, to your point about if you need help, it's harder to call
Right.
for it, right? So
Hmm.
these all these dynamics within men's and women's spaces that actually I want to improve to be a part
Hmm.
of designing better ones. Like, could still have them, but we can make them better. And I think
Right.
a lot of people would like that. But all gender multi-stall spaces are different because they're fully enclosed stalls. They're almost essentially their own room.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a naming thing really than it is about, so that people understand this is your own room, has its own lighting, most often. There's a color coded lock so that people can see it's occupied and aren't trying to barge in. Um, there's also open entrances typically to these types of spaces where there's a clear sight line from outside into the space, and then there's privacy within the stall itself, right? So it's just got this nice blend of things. And typically it's centrally located in a place where there's a lot of traffic, so that there's this kind of passive monitoring that is happening,
Mm-hmm.
whether within the facility by all the people in it or from outside of the facility. Some features we've worked with HCMA architecture, and they do really nice touches of like a bench in front of the washroom, so that people are sitting there and rifling through their bag, and so they're paying attention too. So it just has way more safety. Sometimes there's emergency buttons. It's super well lit, like you can see
Mm-hmm.
everything. The sight lines aren't blocked. There's not these like kind of corners where you can get tucked away. Um, and so it's just, and you've got a common sink area that people are there to help each other out if needed. And so it just, there's way more to it, but those, it gives you some texture of just that type of intentional design, so that it's safe, private, and comfortable.
I wanted to ask briefly about inclusive signs because you
Mm.
mentioned that you can't just chuck a sign on and hope for the best. So there's
Right.
it's not signage doesn't have to be super complicated, but there is a level of thought that needs to go into it.
Yeah.
And I guess that's my question is, well, okay, we've all seen, I'm sure, those washroom signs that are like, you alien or cowboy, we don't care, just wash your hands, or
Right. Right. Oh,
like whatever it
courage.
is. Yeah. Or just like, I think often people really want to play and be playful with their
Sure.
signage when it comes to all gender spaces. And so, yeah, could you go into what does good signage actually communicate? What does it look like? And maybe what is a bit less helpful?
Right. Right. Well, we could start with the less helpful, since you gave such a really great example of what to avoid, what we don't recommend. And like you said, I can understand people wanting to be playful. And there are certain workplace cultures that might lend themselves to, they want to be more playful. And I
Right.
understand that. But given the seriousness of washrooms, it is important to be a little bit more matter of fact.
Hmm.
And it is about conveying information and making sure it's clear enough for facility users to select the washroom that's right for them.
Hmm.
So you can probably redirect the playfulness to another area, but leave the signage out of it. So no whatevers, because for many it isn't actually whatever. It's, they get a lot of flack in washrooms, and so
Hmm.
it is kind of sensitive for them, and so that's where that clarity is key. So and your point was also well taken. Simplicity is super
Hmm.
important as well. So when we're signing a all gender multi-stall washroom, so there's other types of washrooms and we can talk about those, but for this purpose, here and now, we'll talk about all gender multi-stall. It is really important to indicate what a facility has. So we're very much focused on function based signage. So, toilet, if there's a shower in there, using that kind of signage with a shower head, right? So, if you're going to depict things, it's with icons, it's important to focus on the function. Um,
Right.
and sometimes if there's a change room, you can have the hanger, right? So there's different ways to depict that. We've seen the full range of different things that people have utilized, and that's really helpful. If you have to use words, then it's about indicating a welcoming message. So everyone welcome is a really powerful way to signal that. Um,
Hmm.
and then it's really clear, no guesswork, and it has this like positive feel to it as well. Oh, okay, everyone, excellent. You want to make sure it is for everyone. So if there's no accessibility within that washroom, then you have to take a different approach, right?
Right.
Case, you can say all genders welcome as an example, or any gender
Hmm.
welcome, right? So you just want to be careful about that with accessibility, because if there's no accessibility, then unfortunately not everyone is welcome, right?
Right.
So that's
Hmm.
clarifying. And then the things not to do along with the alien, it is not to depict gender icons. So
Mm,
steering clear. Sometimes organizations, they think they're signaling everyone by putting the man and woman icon. Um, but unfortunately, that doesn't include folks who are non-binary. And so
mhm.
we don't want to rely on gender icons. Sometimes people think, oh, we'll just add the infamous half skirt, half man, or I can't remember. Some community members have a really clever way of talking about it.
Mm,
Generally, not well received by the trans and non-binary community. Some people are perhaps neutral on the matter, but for many, that is not a reflection of how they experience their gender, how they view it, how they communicate it. Um,
mhm.
there might be an odd exception. Maybe it's not odd, it's just an exception. But yeah, so this is really a key though. For example, I don't consider myself to be half female or half woman, half man icon, right? Like
Right.
there
Yes.
might be some people who are bigender, maybe that represents them, but it's not a way to signal trans and non-binary folks as a whole.
Right.
So that's where it's best just to steer clear, just drop the gender icons entirely and just focus on toilet, shower, hanger icons, whichever ones are relevant. And then if you're going to use text, using everyone welcome.
Mhm. You mentioned about sort of like family spaces a little bit earlier, I
Mm.
think, unless I'm inventing that. Apologies, but
No?
there is such a thing
Yeah.
as family spaces. Sort of, how are they phrased? It's like family rooms or things like
Family
that.
change rooms. Yeah.
So there are a few people who are like who are quite familiar with that already.
Mhm.
And so when we're looking at all gender washrooms and all gender change rooms, often families can maybe see that as it being sort of their space,
Mhm.
even if that's not what was intended, because I guess we have this
Yeah.
background of understanding the idea of a family room. And so, um, yeah, I wanted to know if you could go into that a bit and sort of how that
Mm.
can be navigated and just like what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why is there that protection?
Yeah. It's it has a few things so at play. Some of it is about historical patterns of use
Mhm,
of these spaces. So historically, they have been primarily spaces that were designated or signed as family change rooms.
mhm,
But of course, it's not just families that are served or that need these spaces. And so over time, there's been a shift to calling these universal change rooms
mhm,
because they're for everyone or should be for everybody, given that there are distinct needs, whether it's related to disability or in this case, we're talking about gender diversity. It's really important to expand. There could be other things. People who are aging often have mobility issues that are better served within this type of universal change room. So things
mhm,
have been shifting, and to the degree that organizations tell people when they're updating, more often than not, we find that they don't, unless we're involved, and then we share we kind of encourage folks to update
mhm,
and also to appreciate that some people might not be super welcoming at first about this shift, right? So
mhm,
there's a bit of communication that is helpful to understand why this is happening and who this helps. And now, the main thing that happens, and I understand this because I can only appreciate just how much pressure is on parents and caregivers in general. So, what happens within change rooms, is especially ones attached to pools, is that there are swim lessons that are happening.
mhm.
And so, we have families who high stress moments of having to get their kids ready and out into the
Yes.
pool, getting them swimming about and getting this important knowledge on how to stay alive in the water. So this is important, and they come out and it's a big hubbubaloo. um, so I can appreciate that pressure that they're under and that this is a limited space, especially during high traffic times where there's just mass chaos. I can only imagine. I've seen it a little bit too here and there.
Yes.
And so there can be a defensiveness of this is our space because we have these specific needs at this moment of high pressure. And so that can often be where that conflict arises between family members who are understandably trying to get through the space quickly onto the next thing, I'm sure, and individual users in that space, where often families or parents or caregivers will say to individual users, hey, we need this space more than you. You should go to men's and women's spaces. And
Mhm.
so um, it can even get to conflict where they bring in staff. And so it's just this tension that arises. However, we may not know exactly the reasons why somebody has chosen to use the universal. Some of it is about mobility. So it's older patrons who cannot walk the distance to the men's or the women's, which are usually further away. It can also be about non binary users or even trans men and women who are not very welcomed in men's and
Mhm.
women's spaces. And so it is about letting families know that there's these other needs at play, and really the focus is not on who, but what happens in that space. And the clarity is about using the space as efficiently and as quickly for everyone, because that's the real crunch. It's not so much the people, it's really about people taking a little bit too long. And so maybe having time limits during the high traffic times or some other mechanism to help people move along.
Mhm. Right. On the topic of like all gender change rooms, then I was wondering if you could go into like, well, hang on, I don't
Mm,
remember what I was going to try and say, but
no,
there needs to be a bit of a mentality shift as
mm,
well in terms of like who the sort of I'm saying this separately to families, but just
right.
more generally that often people see like all gender washrooms, all gender change rooms as the trans washroom as well. Like that
Mm,
can be used that way. And so if there can be a mentality shift that it's all gender and it is for every gender, anyone can go in
yeah.
there. It can be. I'm speaking for myself here. The reason that I'm sort of stalling on this is because I
Right.
have a story in which
Yeah.
I was really awkward about this. So that I went to an all gender change room with my partner at the time, who's a man,
Mhm.
and I was suddenly very uncomfortable about him
Ah,
being in there with me, despite
that's
being
so
my
funny.
partner. And it was just a practicality reason we went in there
Sure.
because all my stuff was in his bag along with his stuff. And
Mhm.
rather than standing outside trying to like dig through his bag to get all our stuff out, we just
Right.
went into the all gender one, and then we had the space to get what we needed out. But there was like a very specific moment where I was like very uncomfortable about him being in there with me, despite him being my partner. And of
Right.
course, he was a wonderful partner and a great person,
Uh-huh.
but and definitely not an unsafe person to be around.
Sure.
But all of a sudden, I was feeling uncomfortable because my mentality has been I should be in the women's
Mm.
washroom or women's change room. You should be in the man's
Yeah.
washroom and change room. Why are we doing this alongside each other? I felt like I was breaking some kind of law. I felt like it was uncomfortable, and it was
Yeah.
funny. I mean, we were laughing
Sure.
about it, but I was very, I was like, ooh, deeply uncomfortable about it. And so I was wondering if you could kind of go into that like mentality shift. I mean, obviously you
Yeah.
can't speak for my experience, but
Sure.
like more generally, it's new for a lot of people. And I'm also non-binary. And so
Right.
obviously I am not only am I of course an ally to trans people, but I'm also personally like
Mm.
benefiting from these spaces. So I want these spaces to exist. And even I found them weird at the beginning to get used to.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, it's so fascinating to observe oneself, right?
Hmm.
Kind of going through the feelings, and even if you're in support of it and benefiting from it,
Hmm.
like it could still have a moment of discomfort or like this feels off, right?
Hmm.
In some way. And I think it's okay to acknowledge those things too, right? I think sometimes people think, oh, I should just accept it right away, and especially if they want to be like a super duper ally.
Hmm.
But really it's just about, no, I had a moment of pause, or I didn't quite know how to handle the situation, or I felt uncomfortable
Hmm.
because the pattern has been we separate genders, and you go here, I go there, and it's just very kind of mm, separated. It's hard to And I experienced this when I first came out as trans, going from the women's washroom to the men's, right? I felt I
Mhm.
was passing some invisible threshold that was
Right.
like in violation of something. It's just like, but it really isn't. It's mostly like something we make up as a society, and then we all
Mhm.
kind of fall in line and, do the patterns. But um it just takes some time to adjust, and then it's
Mhm.
not such a big deal, and it is kind of the next thing, right?
Mhm.
um and it is something we commonly hear, and I think it's okay to give oneself permission to adjust to something
Mhm.
that might feel a bit different or is different and whatnot. So yeah, I get it. And I think part of the reason why perhaps that hasn't come up for me, given the kind of mindset shift that you were talking about, is I
Mhm.
grew up in Germany, where
Mm.
it's a different relationship and approach to
Right.
bodies in general. It's not like all of Germany is nude at beaches,
I
but
mean,
there's a little bit more nudity, public
yes.
nudity in Germany in ways that, or designated places, let's call it that, where just like a body is a body. It's not
Right.
anything extra or different. People appreciate diversity of bodies in ways that people aren't staring and commenting. It's just like, no, that's just a different form of another body, right? So
Right.
I like that kind of casual, more matter of fact approach to different physiologies. And they also have more all gender spaces just from the get go. Um,
Right.
they do still have men's and women's spaces, but I went as a kid into all gender change rooms, and saw all kinds of folks, and some of them we didn't have change like private change booths, so you
Right.
saw
Yeah.
everybody of all ages, and it's just matter of fact. And of course there's people using it together and enforcing safety, whether collectively or with support from staff. So you know but again, it's just less sexualized too, so
Mhm.
there's not these kind of harmful things that, I mean, not say that it never happens, obviously it
Right.
does in any country, but it's less of a situation.
Mhm.
And so really interesting that like, for me, it's making sure I appreciate and understand where people do have hesitations, because that's not
Mhm.
actually my experience. I haven't generally hesitated around all gender spaces, but that's because I grew up with it, right?
Right. Yes. Um, you mentioned at the beginning of this episode about a sort of a real example that TransFocus has worked
Mm.
with, and so I was wondering if you could go into that and just kind of go over how thoughtful design can
Mm.
benefit so many different people.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a really good example. And I went there and took video of it just because it was such a good example. And this
Hmm.
is Clayton Community Center, which is in Surrey, British Columbia, in Canada. And we worked with HCMA Architecture, which I've already mentioned. So we're big fans of HCMA and all the great work. They're just so brilliant, and it's
Hmm.
always such a joy to work with them because they really listen and try to understand the issues from a variety of different groups, not just trans and non-binary, but looking at accessibility needs as well, among others. There's cultural aspects. So they took the time, and with City of Surrey, as passionate about these inclusion measures as well, along with environmental. So, bit of a side note, but they created this Clayton Community Center with consultation sessions with the community, and also where we came in, TransFocus came in and provided advice from a gender diversity lens. And this is a facility that's an all gender multi stall washroom. And then they also have all gender multi stall change rooms. So it's two
Hmm.
separate facilities. And we'll link the in the show notes the video in case you want to take a look. And basically, I was thinking about it or reviewing it from a gender diversity lens, but of course, generally, this is something that benefits so many, as we've been talking about. But it's well lit. The indicators to whether something is occupied or not is very clear. It's at the top and it's lit up, so it's very
Mhm.
obvious because it's a white background. So the contrast is amazing. You're like, okay, that is available, or definitely don't go there, right? So
Mhm.
that provides assurance, and it's an open entrance that has two. So there's kind of a pillar in the middle, so it provides some amount of privacy, but then kind of entrances on either side of that pillar. So it's a nice flow through. There's really nice fixtures. It has an adult change table, which I just know is such a big
Yeah.
deal, and provides so much dignity. It's easy to operate. There's no key to get in there. You just get in, use it right away for those who need it. And then there's also the fully enclosed stall as well. So it's really just your own space. You can't hear other people when you're inside, and you can't see anybody else either, right? But there's also
Mhm.
a call button in case you do need help inside, right? So sometimes there can be a bit of a tension between privacy and safety, and so
Mhm.
adding a few other features can help. There's a few other things. There's a vanity area at the back of the facility where people can, a little bit more semi-private, fix their hair, put on makeup, or whatever else they need.
Mhm.
But that's separate from the common sink area, which sometimes people in the research that we've done have mentioned that they feel a little self-conscious,
Mhm.
adjusting themselves in front of other genders that are not used to that. And so these small little adjustments can help make that space really feel comfortable, safe, and like something that you're excited about. And there's like this collective pride in, and we've certainly heard that in the feedback that people have provided. So it's very exciting to see that.
Amazing. Well, I will link that in the show notes. Do you have anything else you wanted to add before we go? Or are you good?
No, that's it. That's all I can think of. I'm sure there's more details, but of
Mhm.
course, every client or situation is slightly different, and so these are some of the overarching key takeaways from the work that we've done.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kai.
Yeah, thank you too. Bye for now.